everyone, and welcome to So Very Wrong About Games, a Canadian podcast unaffected by the Canada Post strike, sent directly to you by our special Sherpa Gibbons. I'm your co-host, Marc Bigney. With me is my dear friend and co-host, Michael Walker.
That's me.
How are you doing, Walker?
Fantastic.
I'm glad that you look fantastic,
Why,
Walker,
thank
I have
you.
to say. There's a glow to your cheeks. You look clear holiday readiness.
Only when you enter the room, sir.
And let me just say, for all those dear Americans that listening to us, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you had a happy Thanksgiving. And I'd like to say, in full seriousness, I meant what I said last week. Self-care is a sacred obligation that you owe to yourself. For those of you that had trying circumstances, either in terms of being able to spare time for family, or trying circumstances in family, or anywhere in between, I hope you were able to practice some self-care this past week. And as more stressful times approach, please do practice self-care. So we're going to talk about board games this week. We're going to talk about the as-yet unnamed retrospective intro segment, the AYURIS, what we reviewed a year ago. We're going to talk about the games we played last week. And then we're going to talk about the news and why it doesn't matter. And finally, our topic, which is managing tempo. Games that let you finesse and manage the tempo of a game. We haven't talked about tempo in a while in terms of our topic, and we are going to revisit it and elaborate on it. So, Walker, what did we review a year ago?
I looked it up and I wrote it down, Mark. We played a game called Gatefall.
No need to shine on how you do labor for the podcast, Walker. We get it.
No, because I did look it up, but I forgot to write it down, so I'm like totally guessing.
So you're lying. You're lying
Yes.
to our listeners now.
Yeah, for the first time.
Yes, Gatefall is the deck building / miniatures game by Jack Dyer, and it's got the bigatures as a term coined, to the best of my knowledge, by our own Handwerker.
Yeah, they were fantastic. I'd look it up just to see the miniatures themselves, because there's some
Honestly, pictures don't do it justice.
there are some hilarious pictures, where they have like other figures lined up
Sure.
beside these gigantic monstrosities. It's like this person's painting is 40K, and it slowly goes from miniature to dreadnought, and there's just giant orc. It's pretty amazing.
So there have been a couple of expansions. We've tried them. They're good. There's been another Kickstarter with a new base set full of Universal Studio monsters. This has been held up rather considerably. Look, when you're getting an indie miniatures game, you should expect delays. And I have just been glossing it over. Long story short, it's the same old travails of crowdfunding. But Gatefall is great. It is super light, super accessible and approachable dice chucker. And I don't know that it's necessarily one of my favorite skirmishy things, but I do really like skirmishy things, and it's very enjoyable. So I'm glad to have Gatefall around.
It definitely does not overstay its welcome.
That is for damn
plays
sure,
nice
yeah.
and quick, and like lots of different characters you can choose from. Pretty neat.
And I think it's a somewhat cleaner hybrid of miniatures gaming and deck building than, for example, the Ascension miniatures game. The Ascension Tactics miniatures game, it's got its charms and it's okay, but it's very much a sort of creaky Frankenstein. See what I did there with the Universal Monsters? This is a segue. We're dealing with a pastiche. It's an idiom. It's a whole thing. It's a vibe. Ride with me, Walker. Ride with me to the gates of Valhalla. This is mixing a metaphor now, Walker.
I'm with you.
Yes. It is a more awkward marriage in the Ascension Tactics game, I think. It's a fine game. It's just like, I don't know that it meshes together, which is a testament to the simplicity of Gatefall. Sometimes simple is the best way to go. And you basically build a deck so as to be able to get more action efficiency. You're not going to be getting a whole bunch of action cards or weird stuff. Part of me wishes there were a little bit more, but then again, I look at the more complicated hybrids and they don't work quite as well. So who's to say?
When I was looking into it, it made me yearn for Underworlds again, and I wish they hadn't really screwed that up.
Back in the good old days when Warhammer Underworlds was like self-contained and simple, and then it just sprawled like everything else. Yeah,
Well, not that just the fact that they changed it. I don't care about the sprawl. You can get as big as you want, but the fact that you just change. Well, we're going to change the backs of the cards, and you can't use the old cards. And,
well, that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Just the moment you get into a meta, it's not just that there's 50. If there were 50 million factions, but they all the rule set stayed coherent, and the deck building was sufficiently constrained, that would be one thing. But that's part and parcel of the sprawl. The different card backs, the deck construction keeps changing, and the cards get obsolete. It's inevitable in that kind of format. It's just back in the early days, you could convince yourself that it wasn't going to be that way.
True.
But Gatefall remains great. That is Gatefall by Jack Dyer Studios, designed by, wait for it, Jack Dyer. So, we now move on to the games we played last week. Walker, what'd you play last week?
Mark, I got to play The Gang. This is designed by John Cooper and Kory Heath.
Rest in peace, Mr. Heath.
Put out by KOSMOS, and it just continues to be a very fun game. We're finding out some more of the specialists that come out and some more of the challenges, because there's a whole different deck. If you win, you have to win 3 rounds in a row. And if you win, you get a challenge. If you lose, you get a specialist. So seeing how, these different cards change up how you play is very interesting. I very much enjoy Texas Hold'em. I've played a lot of it. Still playing it online. So I will continue to enjoy the gang.
By it, do you mean the gang or do you mean Texas Hold'em?
Both.
Are you going to be gambling away your so very wrong about games money?
No, I shouldn't say I've never played for real money. Like in person, I used to play with real money.
Sure.
Like a one-time...
Relatively low stakes, though, I imagine.
Yeah, like $20 buy-in, you play for the night.
Yeah, sure.
Online, it's all play chips.
Okay.
And you just, No.
I was momentarily concerned, Walker, not because I necessarily think that you're especially prey to it. It's just that Ontario, in general, is kind of a wash in online, they call it gaming. I've been involved in Ontario gaming for many years. It doesn't really involve what they call Ontario gaming, but anyway.
No, that's what the same line I tell everyone. They don't build casinos to give up money.
Absolutely. Yeah, the game's great. I wish I could play it some more. The specialists are neat. The way the additional challenges work is neat. I mean, the core structure, though, it evokes that brilliant kind of co-op magic where you're engaged in subtle telepathy, where it's like, oh, they took the 2 last round. That probably means they had that they're trying to build towards something. Oh, but then they knocked it down to a 4. Clearly, what they're trying to build for didn't manifest. Oh, but then they went anyway. So being able to like read the tea leaves, the sort of history of an individual's hand is really cool. And the thing that I confess, this is entirely me being stupid. I think, okay, this is a co-op Texas Hold'em game, right? And I naturally jump to that means we want all our hands to be really good, right? No, that doesn't follow at all.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah, so sometimes a specialist comes up and my immediate impression is, okay, we can all use that to make all our hands better. It's like, no. If everyone's hand becomes good, that makes the game really hard. You want some people to have terrible hands so long as they know that they're terrible hands. Anyway, the gang is really well done. I've never enjoyed Texas Hold'em poker, but I think that this is one of the best riffs on poker mechanisms that I've seen in the Eurosphere in quite some time, and I very much enjoy it. So next time you play, keep me in mind. That is the gang. Walker showed me Jekyll and Hyde versus Scotland Yard. This is the co-op version of Jekyll versus Hyde. So all of these are 2-player trick-taking games, but this is the co-op version. This was designed by Gaëtan Beaujannot, beautiful name, Olivier Cipière, and Geonil. And it's got beautiful Vincent Dutré art. I really appreciate their artwork there. It's kind of the savagery of Mr. Hyde, the sort of barely contained sophistication of your Dr. Jekyll. And similar to the 2-player game, a lot of it is about the delta between tricks won by both players. In the context of the scenarios we played, it's you have to advance a certain number of steps, and you advance a number of steps based on the number of tricks won by the player who won the fewest tricks. So you're trying to equalize them in this particular case. And what was really cool about this version was my principal recollection of Jekyll versus Hyde is that I could not, for the life of me, figure out how to make the potions work to my advantage. It just seemed like a weird event that would happen that other people could leverage, but that I just never kind of figured out how I could make them work properly. This was not a rules issue. This was a strategy issue.
That's the one part I really love about these Mandoo games and this particular sort of series of games is that they have this ranking system like Marc was talking about. No, that has nothing to do with the potions.
That's fine.
On top of what Marc was talking about is like every time, as soon as the hand starts, as soon as you play a card, this starts the ranking system. So if you play blue, that's going to be the weakest. And there's 3 suits. And as you play them, you set out these tokens to show the ranking. So as soon as the second color is played, it becomes second, and then you know what's going to be third. And that totally changes up how you play and makes it very interesting. It was such a stark contrast between, we had just finished talking about the Lord of the Rings, the deck, cooperative trick-taking game, and then went into this, and how much more I enjoyed this over that game.
Yeah, I have to agree. In a very real way, the different scenarios of the Jekyll and Hyde co-op game, I think, leverage the mechanisms better than the different scenarios in the Lord of the Rings trick-taking game. I mean, after all, that was one of my salient criticisms. That was the way in which it differed from the crew, and I don't think that the missions in Lord of the Rings were quite as interesting, although on occasion, as we mentioned in the review, they pull out something that's kind of out of left field, and I like that. I just wish they'd done that a little bit more. And yeah, the way to determine trump, the ranking of the suits in the both Jekyll and Hyde games is extraordinarily well done and cool. And this time the potions make more sense to me. On top of that, you have the city deck, which is kind of the neutral deck, and sometimes you really want the city to win tricks because you have to hit your target exactly in order to win this scenario. So sometimes you're in a position of trying to go null, but because there's only 3 suits, the city deck playing off the top, it's just a random card from set-aside cards. I think it's just the right amount of chaos for a co-op game, right? Because your opportunity to go void, it's kind of within your control relatively early on, and that helps mitigate the utter randomness of the city deck just playing off the top. And so it's got all those lovely tensions of trick-taking games, wanting to win tricks, getting the lead when that's difficult, wanting to stay null sometimes. And it's really well done. I have only seen the first 2 scenarios, so I'm looking forward to seeing what else it does, whether the system evolves. I haven't yet played with the eponymous Scotland Yard element of Jekyll versus Hyde, but I'm looking forward to giving it a shot.
So we streamed Chronicles of Avel this weekend, and I'm often asked...
Chronicles of Avel, right?
Avel. I'm often asked,
What? Sorry, do you mind saying again? I'm sorry.
That's all right. So we streamed... This Saturday, we streamed a game called Chronicles of Avel. And I'm often asked, games for children. I always try to remember to suggest this one because this is a great sort of pandemic-like adventuring game. This is designed by
Przemek Wojtkowiak.
Published by Rebel Studio. And it's very much sort of gearing up, getting ready for the giant beast coming about 8 to 10 rounds before the beast appears at the top of the map and starts storming down towards your main city. And you can put up walls and you can build some trebuchets and set up some traps in order to slow him down. He has a massive amount of hit points. So it's sort of killing monsters and gearing up for his arrival. And so when he does finally show up, you can kill it. But some of the interesting hooks is that you have sort of a 2-layered board and your backpack is sort of outlined and you can only fit as many items as you can fit in the backpack.
Yeah.
So you have gold pieces and swords and stuff that you have to sort of fit in there, and you get to upgrade all these weapons as well. Because you also have your character template. You have a place for a sword and boots and a shield and a helmet, and all of those items can be upgraded. So I think it's a great game for children. You roll the dice, you roll hits and blocks, and it's fairly straightforward, but enough interest there for parents to play as well.
Yeah, you've played it a number of times, not with children, so clearly there's enough there for hobbyist gamers as well as kids.
I think so as well, because you slide in a sheet on top of that for your character, which you can color. You can give it to your children before the game even starts, so they can color up.
I know a lot of adults who would be all over coloring their sheet.
You can color up your character and name your characters. There's even a little coat of arms that you get to design as well.
Oh wow, I didn't know that part.
It's like just a blank shield.
Oh, that's great.
That you get to fill in as you see fit. And there's an expansion. We played with a couple. I think just one of the expansions. I do have one of the other big ones, but it's all just sort of extra modules that seemed easy enough to manage, but I wanted to just play the base game. There's some animal companions that we had and the trebuchets that were interesting that we added on. All in all, I would check it out. It's on the stream on our YouTube live channel. Check it out. Chronicles of Avel. And this all was a review copy that Rebel Games was nice enough to send to us.
Got to play Han. Han is by Michael Schacht. The most recent version of this core game that started with Web of Power is called AYURIS. And I like some of the elaborations of AYURIS, but frankly, I find the version in Han to be just fine and more, at least evocative of something. AYURIS is kind of all over the place with a pseudo-mystical kind of thing that didn't do a whole lot for me. It's colorful and nice, and Thundergriff Games puts on a good production, but I kept my old ABACUSSPIELE copy of Han from 2014. It's a smaller box, gets the job done. It is a remarkably simple, quick, and tight area majority game. And I've enjoyed every iteration of it that I've tried with varying modifications. So if you can find Han, Web of Power, China was a version produced shortly after Web of Power, and AYURIS, I think they're all worth playing, each in their own way. There's a very interesting, very simple scoring system to determine majority in a region. And on top of that, there's another form of majority based on borders. So you can put houses on spaces, and that's competing for the straightforward area majority. But then there are these ambassadors or envoys. They're called different things in different editions. And they score if you have, or at least are tied for the most on both sides of a border. So if you can stock a central province with a lot of your ambassadors, and then start stocking up a whole bunch of adjacent ones. That can get you a lot of points, but it's a high risk, high reward strategy. So there's this lovely combination of guaranteed points for relatively little effort to high risk, high reward investment in these things. And you can pursue a balance of both strategies. I went all in for the ambassadors this time. They worked well. I got a lot of points for the ambassadors, but not enough from those that very cleverly did a little bit of both, as I say. So there are two maps in the Han version, one for higher player counts, one for lower player counts, and they, again, work slightly differently. I just love the core engine. It's really well done, and it is relentlessly enjoyable. I've been playing this game for a very long time, and it's one of my favorite intro-weight, gamer-friendly area majority games. That is Han by Michael Schacht. This is the ABACUSSPIELE version from 2014, but as I say, any version that you can find is definitely worth a try.
I showed Marc Splendor Duel. This is designed by Marc-André and Bruno Cathala, put out by Space Cowboys, and it's sort of a two-player version of Splendor. And it's very tactile. It's got these nice, scroll, plastic
scroll minis,
tokens, and these nice poker chips that you lay out on the board that you're going to sort of draft out of there to, normal Splendor style, build up sort of a gem tableau to start getting more and more gems, and 3 different end game scoring conditions. Trying your best to, action efficiency, get to one of those before the other player. Mark, what did you think of Splendor Duel?
Yeah, Splendor is very much a sort of snapshot of some aspects of contemporary Eurogaming, right? Tableau building with action efficiency and laser focus on recipe fulfillment, right? Because you're bootstrapping your requirements to satisfy these recipes, but the big value recipes require, frankly, more than could be reasonably accumulated over the course of a normal set of play. So what you do is you get these smaller value cards that give you bonuses towards later things. This much so far is exactly the same way that it works in Splendor. The key difference between Splendor and Splendor Duel is how the resources are accumulated, as well as you said, those lovely scroll minis, which I think add a fair bit to the game, frankly. It's a little bit of elaboration. And Bruno Cathala, I don't know what specifically his responsibilities were and which responsibilities were Marc-André, but I can only imagine that his participation in this collaboration was really what elevated it. I vastly preferred Splendor Duel over a normal Splendor. I think that the changes are very much for the good. And I thought it was a perfectly reasonable and enjoyable sort of modern Euro filler thing. Not my absolute favorite, but I'd happily play it whenever suggested. And the tactile appeal of the, as you say, poker chips representing the gems, as well as those lovely little plastic things. I don't know why. Those little scrolls, I really like them. I say they're little, but for a small box game, they're pretty big. They're a couple inches long, and they're vastly thicker and more elaborate than they have any right to be. They could have easily been cardboard tokens, but what can I say? I'm easily amused.
Yeah, there's sort of a build-up. I do have the new Lord of the Rings Duel one, with the same sort of premise. I wanted to show them Splendor Duel first. So next week, we'll get around to doing the Lord of the Rings one. But for Splendor Duel, the time it takes, how easy it is to teach, and the fact that you have multiple ways to victory makes it a very interesting and fun little game.
Played Battalion War of the Ancients. This is a review copy we got from the publisher. This is designed by Paolo Mori and Francesco Sirocchi. Now, these are the 2 designers who did the Pocket Battles series of games, which are also 2-player, mostly historical. They then did like orcs and elves and stuff like that. Tile-based battle games where you set out a line of units and then you just start abstractly engaging units with each other. And they're very much like in table battles, although somewhat differently in Battalion War of the Ancients, there's a very strong emphasis on command and control. You're not there to kill things, really. If you can force your opponent to regroup, to recuperate their command tokens, that frankly is good enough, because what happens is you have a deck of cards at the top of the game. In most games, you're going to have somewhere between 6 and 8. And if you run out of cards and need to draw a new card, you lose. Okay, well, how can you force someone to draw cards? Well, one of them is by eliminating a unit. Another is by forcing them to regroup. Oh, okay, well, I'll just never regroup then. Well, you have a finite number of order tokens, and you're going to run out of them real quick.
Yeah, there's a super emphasis on these tokens, because you need them to command units, you need them to soak up hits, and they're also going to, I don't know how to say, corrupt, or they,
disorder.
They flip to disorder, so you need to constantly refresh these in other ways, and like Mark said, the big penalty of completely regrouping.
Yeah, And this dovetails with the army composition. We played with a recommended battle, the Greeks versus the Han dynasty. And one of the units that was, again, in this pre-selected starting scenario setup, were conscripts, basically prisoner conscript infantry. And I looked and I saw that they were able to take 4 hits before being disbanded, when a lot of your elite units can only take 2 hits before being disbanded. My initial thought was, oh, that sounds really good. It's not, because what that means is they can just sit there soaking up a huge quantity of disorder, forcing you to regroup pretty much the turn after they get hit. So that's not great. And so mechanically that's satisfying. It's also vaguely thematically satisfying. As I say, it's a very, very abstract experience, but there's lots of different historical troop types available. And there are relatively straightforward rules about how to combine them. You're incentivized to keep your units homogeneous because that reduces the command burden of activating them. But by the same token, if you mix and match units, all their special abilities stack. So there's this temptation to mix up as well. And in the starting scenario we played, we got to experience both types of units and the benefits and burdens of each. I was very, very pleased with the dynamics of Battalion War of the Ancients. I was not expecting command and control to exert so strong a set of competing interests so quickly into the game. And so it was fast and engaging right from the get-go. I don't know how much additional latitude we're going to get in terms of army building, but I'm looking forward to seeing it. But the core element, the command and control element, is really good. I'd be happier if there were a slightly higher volume of dice, though, because it's one of those games not entirely unlike Undaunted, where the core system is great, the trade-offs are great, the mechanism is great, it's tense, you have lots of difficult decisions to make, but you're rolling a small number of dice, and I feel like a couple of sets of aberrant rolls might really swing things, and that's a concern.
It's true. I do love how the overall combat does work, how you have these goal numbers to hit, and the better units have more slots that you can add dice into, and anyway.
Yeah, so like a mediocre infantry unit might hit on a 5+, but an elite cavalry unit might hit on a 7+ and a 4+, and this is relevant because although they're not going to necessarily contribute more dice, it just gives you more opportunity to use the dice because you slot them in there. On top of that, there's a critical hit system. If you roll an 8 on an 8-sided die, that's a hit, and it doesn't have to be assigned to your unit at all. So it was a little counterintuitive. Like you, for example, remarked that it was very strange to think that every unit started with 3 dice, regardless of whether they were great troops or terrible troops or lots of troops or
half destroyed troops.
Half destroyed troops, exactly. But nonetheless, there you are. Like the burden of having destroyed troops is more in the command and control element. Yeah. But in terms of their deadliness, it's still the same. Look, as a Napoleonics wargamer, fundamentally at heart, I'm more than able to just imagine they're all in column. And, a half-depleted column is as deadly as a full-strength column. But then again, that only gets you so far. Like the skirmishers, the slingers, the light archers, for example, they would,
It's always the morale, Mark. The morale.
It's true. You're right. They're esprit de corps.
Just so. I got to play Rats of Wistar again. This was on Board Game Arena, because they have it on there now. And still enjoying it. It's a game where there's a dial in the middle that moves around between these 3 sort of areas, and you're populating those 3 areas with worker mice, and depending on how many worker mice that you have there makes the actions that you take in those areas stronger. At the same time, you're sort of adventuring into the farmhouse, you're building up your sort of tableau, you're digging out more tunnels for like special mice or your own workers, so you can put more workers out on the board. Lots of invention cards that you're building, these very much like robots, very, very silly looking, interesting looking inventions.
Yeah, raising robots, yeah.
Yeah, that you're building these little rat contraptions. Anyway, overall, very much enjoying Rats of Wistar.
Can I make an aside as to the theming?
Yes.
If this is an exaggeration.
It's not Secret of Nim.
But if I've never
totally is not.
I've never seen Secret of Nim, I can't comment. But if 99+% of games are going to be anthropomorphic animals, why can't more of them be in the style of Rats of Wistar? Because all these other anthropomorphic animal games, I can't help but feel that so many of them are just like, okay, well, there's just going to be people with animal heads. But Rats of Wistar, it's these, they're demonstrably rats engaging in human-like activities. And it's just more adorable and charming, I think. It's at least slightly different. So pro tip, if you're going to be the next publisher that's going to issue the 5,000th anthropomorphic animal game this year, try to imagine, well, maybe instead of just doing the same version over again, maybe a little different.
Leave the animals in their own element.
Yeah, there you go. Have respect for their indigenous environment.
That's Rats of Wistar, designed by Simone Luciani and Danielo Saba, and put out by Cranio Creations.
Finally got to try Galactic Renaissance, specifically with the 5th player expansion. So Galactic Renaissance was kickstarted by Matago, and we have been playing it off and on ever since we got it. I'm a big fan of it. This is by Christian Martinez. It's his second published design after Inish. I vastly prefer it to Inish, even though some traces of the original design remain. And I got the 5-player expansion retail. I didn't pledge for that. And I did it for 2 reasons. For one set of reasons, which I would not necessarily defend as particularly legitimate. And that is that, well, it has my preferred player color in it. And I really like the sculpt of the new yellow faction. It is what it is. I was momentarily concerned that I had not done my due diligence. And I was going to have mismatched components. Right? Because you have the deluxe Kickstarter, but then you get the retail 5th player expansion. They don't match. Don't worry. It's all fine. The only people who might have mismatched components are anyone who has the retail version and then buys the retail expansion. And then you're going to have a couple of deluxe components in the expansion to match the version that you don't have. But don't worry. It's fine. Just use all the cardboard ones and you'll be good. And the slightly more legitimate reason is I was curious to try Galactic Renaissance with 5. I had some misgivings. I didn't think that it was going to be at its best with 5. And to a certain extent, I was correct, because one issue is downtime. I felt myself, Walker, becoming a monster. It's not my fault. Why didn't you lay out how it felt on your end?
Oh, it felt odd because nothing to do with the downtime. It was mostly to do with the fact that Galactic Renaissance really pays off if you've played it before. So we were playing with 2 people that had not played it before, and the differences very much showed. You know, picking up for the first time versus people that have played it before, I felt there was a huge disparity there.
That's a very magnanimous take. You were shooting daggers from your eyes during my turn.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Look. Here's the situation. In my defense, I had a couple of different specialist cards.
Sorry, that statement implies that you have a defense.
I do. It's a very good defense.
Okay, sorry.
I think.
Continue then.
I'm the victim here. I think I'm going to get the audience on side. I'm not. I had several cards that said, play this card, draw the top 3 specialists, and then keep 1 and return the others. That meant that on some turns, I had to read 6 different special ability cards, making choices about which ones I wanted. I couldn't do this between turns either, because the composition of the deck might change. And look, people get very upset when you draw sooner than you're supposed to, because, oh, that's supposed to be my card. I keep telling them, look, it's random. Random is random. It's all input randomness anyway. But a number of people at our table, among them Louis and Huey, react very violently to the suggestion, because they have this metaphysical notion that the top card was theirs by rights, and whatever it was, anyway, setting all that aside. So that was an issue. And on top of that, I had a number of play a card, then play another card, then play a card, draw a couple of cards, play some more cards, draw some more cards issues going on. And I felt myself becoming the monster that I never wanted to be.
Especially in this game, because the major scoring opportunity in this game is every time your senator card comes up. And there's sort of like limitations of the game that don't let you cycle. It's very difficult to get an engine that lets you draw cards like that. So the quicker you can cycle that senator back up into your hand, the more points you're going to score. So
this, I think, is what we call in the professional dramaturgy studies foreshadowing.
Yes, just so.
Because we may have occasion to talk about that in the future. So yes, 5-player was not ideal. I will say this, though. In addition to downtime, I had a small concern about overall game length, because sometimes it can cause a game to overstay its welcome. But one interesting thing about Galactic Renaissance is, not entirely unlike Inish, is that it scales automatically by virtue of the actions of the players. So you have these planets, you start with a home planet, and then there's a hub planet. And new planets enter the game every time someone plays an explorer. Well, if you have 5 players, more explorers are going to be played. And so the board swells, and with it, the scoring opportunities swell faster. Now, to your point, that makes it a little more daunting for new players, because the pace of the game accelerates faster than would be ideal. So I absolutely agree from your implied critique, as well as my earlier intuitions, that Galactic Renaissance is not at its best with 5. However, I thoroughly enjoy Galactic Renaissance, and therefore would be more willing to play it at 5 than lots of other games that are at their best at 5. So that is the experience with the Galactic Renaissance expansion. It also adds a couple of new cards, especially scoring opportunities, which is great, because the way scoring works in Galactic Renaissance is very cool too. You have a rotating cast of scorecards that get cycled in and out as people reach various point thresholds. I really like how that's handled as well, and more variety there is for the good. So that's Galactic Renaissance, in particular the fifth player expansion, designed by Christian Martinez, published by Matago.
Now, actually, lastly for me, we got to play Hallertau, designed by Uwe Rosenberg and put out by Lookout Games. This is like yet another typical Uwe Rosenberg. Guess what? You're planting crops, and you get to breed sheep.
Slow down. Actually, no, they don't breed. The sheep don't breed.
100% breed. That space says breed sheep.
No, but not
automatically.
You
right?
buy the sheep.
Yes.
You show up and you trade milk for sheep.
But it does say breeding on them, though. It does say on that space. Anyway.
Okay, you're right. I forgot. Yeah, you liquor up the sheep and then you leave and you come back and then there are more.
Yes, it's fermented milk, you see.
Yeah, and you don't ask questions and then you have to hide all the Barry White records.
Suddenly there's more sheep. But I really enjoy...
Can I have an older reference? Like, what's a contemporary version of, like...
Timberlake? I don't know.
Timberlake?
He's bringing sexy back.
No, that... I think... so the problem is Man of the Woods definitely did not bring sexy back. And even he, I think, is a solid 10 to 20 years maybe too old.
It's pretty dated too, yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't... Do kids these days listen to sexy music? Or do they listen to like sad, breathy chanteuses? Because, like, let me tell you one thing. Ain't no sheep breeding to Billie Eilish. That's for damn sure.
This is also true.
This musical interlude has been brought to you by Hallertau.
Yeah, we're up on the hip beats. All right.
Well, this was my acknowledging that I didn't know anything about the hip beats.
All right. I really do enjoy the planting system in this particular Uwe Rosenberg. You've got this interesting chart where it has crop rotation. Long story short, crop rotation. If you plant crops... has a sort of sliding scale. If it's on 5, you get 5 wheat, and then it goes down. The next turn, you only get 4, and the next turn, you only get 3. But if you don't plant any crops in a field, it slowly goes up, and the field gets better, which is how fields kind of work.
Reality.
Yes.
Yeah, if you don't plant anything in the field moves.
Yeah,
you have to plant the crops to cement it down so it can't. The roots keep it bound.
Speaking of cementing things down, in Hallertau, you have this coasting cottage that also coasts along your board.
There's a lot of movement going on in Hallertau that doesn't make any sense.
You're paying for all these sort of, I don't know, let's just say like sort of village upgrades.
They're called craft buildings,
Yes, and so you're paying all these different costs. You're depleting all of your resources. It takes all sorts of different kinds, and they all sort of slide over one space. Once you slide them all over one space, that allows the whole cottage to move over, which gets you more workers. There's also boulders in the way that are going to stop you from moving them multiple spaces in a turn. Get tools to move them. Anyway, lots going on.
The thing that I like most about Hallertau in terms of differentiating it from the other Uwe Rosenberg games is how it deals with cards. So you've got these cards, and a lot of them are not spend so much to get so much. A lot of them are have this amount of resources, and then this card will trigger letting you do various things. And that I really like. It's got a pleasant sense of bootstrapping. It's got a lot of the traditional, pay 10 resources, get 10 points at the end of the game. Sure, fine. That's good too. But I really like how the mid-game bootstrapping works with the card system. And on top of the other clever bits, with the movable farmhouse and the movable fields, those are all great too. As I say, when it comes to Uwe Rosenberg worker placement games, you like them or you don't after trying a couple. But I do think that when compared to a lot of his output, like if you compare it to the Black Forest, Hallertau is more unlike a lot of the other Uwe Rosenbergs than Black Forest is, for example, I would maintain. And it's one of the reasons why I like to bring it out every once in a while. So what happens is when you play Hallertau, you get a lot out of it, but then you set it aside and it sort of goes back into its full potential. It increases. See, it's like game rotation. It's a new idea.
Yes, I like it. I like it.
You like it? You like it?
If you don't play it, it gets better.
Yeah, it moves up.
Yeah.
You leave it on the shelf and it just sort of climbs up its ranking on the shelf. Yeah.
Just so.
Yeah. So that's Hallertau by Uwe Rosenberg, published by Lookout Games. Those are the games we played last week. Now a quick break while we pay some bills. And we're back. And now on to the news and why it doesn't matter.
Mark, people like Arabian Nights. I have yet to play it. People all say it's like a storytelling type game. I think I'm going to enjoy it. And now there's going to be a 40th anniversary edition coming out on crowdfunding. So if you've ever heard anyone talk about it or always wanted to try it or get your own copy, because it's probably kind of hard to get, Arabian Nights 40th anniversary edition, soon to be on crowdfunding.
Yeah, Tales of the Arabian Nights was one of those mythical games when I first got into hobby gaming again. because it had been out of print for a long time. It was hard to get. And at the time, there weren't really any paragraph-driven narrative games on the market. Now there are tons. I don't know how well Tales of the Arabian Nights is going to hold up in the current market, but we'll see. So, controversy on Board Game Geek, Walker. In 2008...
do tell.
Yeah. Day ending in Y. In 2008, there was a game called Powerboats that was published by Quali, designed by Kory van Moorsel. I'm probably mispronouncing that. It was redeveloped into a game called Power Ships in 2018. Well, in 2019, there was a whole bunch of back and forth between Mr. Van Moorsel and Duncan Malloy of Rebellion Unplugged. There were offers and counteroffers made for publishing a reprint of Powerboats, and then Duncan Malloy published a game called Joyride, which has a movement system that is, shall we say, extraordinarily similar to Powerboats. Now, the specifics of the controversy, I think, in terms of the discussion, have been focusing on the wrong things. Because, as you probably know, as has been told many a time by both armchair lawyers and actual lawyers, you can't really legally protect a game design. You can protect the text of various things, you can protect the game, the visual elements, but the actual mechanisms cannot really easily be legally protected. And besides, setting all that aside, even if they could, at the end of the day, whoever has the bigger law budget wins, as a general rule. QV Nintendo's lawsuits, QV Games Workshop's lawsuits, etc., etc. But anyway, setting all that aside, I would like to focus on the following thing. Setting aside the legalities, and even setting aside the extent to which it is legitimate to publish a game like Joyride, insofar as whether it is sufficiently different from Powerboats. What gets me kind of nervous as somebody who cares about the hobby is that Mr. Malloy was either thinking of designing or already starting to design a game that used a lot of systems that were present in a game that he was in discussion to reprint. And at no point was this discussed or mentioned in the rulebook or to the designer of that original game. We've talked a lot on this show before. We talked about it last week in the context of the Lord of the Rings trick-taking game, and I said I would have liked an acknowledgement in the rulebook that they clearly took a lot from the crew. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they somehow invented it independently, but I find that somewhat difficult to believe.
They play a lot of trick-taking games, just not the crew.
Yeah, exactly. In this case, we have a paper trail demonstrating that Duncan Malloy was familiar with Powerboats, and indeed was potentially interested in a business arrangement with the person who had designed Powerboats. And then he releases a game that owes a lot to Powerboats. And the only open acknowledgement that we have is in a designer diary on Board Game Geek. That ain't enough. At a minimum, I would say, setting aside the prior contact he'd had with the designer, this is the kind of thing that should be acknowledged on the crowdfunding campaign, acknowledged in the rulebook, possibly even acknowledged on the box. We've seen this done in a classy way. Envelopes of Cash did this in an extraordinarily good way. Cite your work. The fact that there was a publisher arrangement on top of this makes me deeply uncomfortable, and that, I think, takes it from potentially problematically unclassy straight on into, if this becomes a general pattern, this could be very, very bad for the hobby. So, look, as to the specifics of the details, is it too close? Is it sufficiently elaborated so as to be its own standalone design? I don't know. I haven't played the games. I can't comment. I've read the rules to both of them, and yes, the movement system is extraordinarily similar. At the very least, cite your work. That is the news, and why it doesn't matter. We now move on to our topic, which is controlling the tempo, Walker. Low and slow, that is the tempo.
Control the flow.
Control that flow. So we just talked about Galactic Renaissance. Yes. And I think this is a good example of, I think, one level of being able to control the tempo of a game. Although it's less interesting, this is not a dig on the game, I just mean in terms of the tempo manipulation, I think it's less interesting than some other games. Because you want to cycle through your deck in Galactic Renaissance as fast as humanly possible. Because you have your Senate card, and that's where you're going to score the bulk of your points. Indeed, it's almost impossible to win the game, except on a turn where you play the Senate card. But in Galactic Renaissance, you don't shuffle your deck. You just recycle your cards in the same order in which they were played. And so anything that lets you speed up that process is good. So if you have a card that lets you draw more cards, or discard cards, or shuffle your deck, even a card that lets you shuffle your deck, very, very powerful to do that. And so doing well in Galactic Renaissance often is about manipulating that tempo to just go as fast as you can, cycling through your deck.
I have that on sort of under the category of endgame trigger, because by doing that, you are sort of pushing the end of the game faster because first person to get to
30
points,
some number
is the winner. And so I've sort of broken this down into different categories like that. Like how do games control tempo?
Yep.
So I have chess-like games in which you sort of can put pressure on certain areas that force play from other players, like Barony, where they can see how many moves that's going to take you to take their village. And so they know that they have time to get there, or they don't, or by you putting stress on them, that means you have time to do something else because they have to deal with that.
Yeah, or Antica, where the military pressure exists largely to force them to engage in suboptimal or less than efficient moves. Making them take maneuver when they otherwise might not have, or making them exploit resources sooner than they might have done so otherwise. Yeah.
And then I have poker type games. So games where you're allowed to like bluff or presenting it, there's a chance of great loss. Like say if I'm going to attack you and I have like 8 military cards or something. And so you're just going to withdraw, right? And so you're presenting this huge force that's just going to make them pull away.
Yep.
So bluffing.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
I find it more interesting in the obverse, in the context of auction games, right? Because the same phenomenon exists.
I do have that later on as in same thing, auction games. And I use that a lot in Skull, right?
Precisely.
Where it's that's such a precise opening bid.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's like I bid 4 and then it's so high. And I've tried that also in the game we just played when we played Modern Art. It's trying to get that perfect opening bid, which is just high enough to scare people not to bid at all.
Exactly. And you might end up, therefore, spending less money and indeed causing other people to pass when they might have been willing to go higher if it goes incrementally, right? If you bid 35 when the previous bid was 10, that might scare people off. If you just go one up, I don't know, you might end up paying 40. Yeah. It's truly interesting. I never, that's the kind of process that I find fascinating to observe. I never really have a good sense of how to exploit it. I've never been good at it because I seem to find myself in a position to be like, yeah, I'll do that aggressive bid, 35. And that just encourages other people to double down as well. I'm like, oh, I should have just said 12.
Isle of Skye does this in an interesting way as well, where you get to put up some tiles to sell to the other players, and being able to set the price on those tiles is also, a way to sort of,
I don't know. Is that a tempo thing or just the economy? Is that just juicing what?
Well, I mean, at the very beginning of the game, you can sort of set the tempo for the game. If you start putting everything out for cheap, and that market moves much more quickly than usual, or you could set it high right off the beginning, and for the whole game, everyone starts setting their tiles for a big price.
Personally, I wouldn't use the term tempo for that. I think that's just manipulating what the economy is going to look like, whether it's going to be a high money game or a low money game. But it's still going to last the same period. People are still going to act in the same order and do the same things in the same way, but just maybe spend more in the process, as opposed to like cutting off an auction and really making sure that it's short because of that aggressive initial bid, or drawing things out so people will overcommit in the context of poker. It's like, ooh, how much do I raise so I really bait the hook and make sure they're in this for the long haul? Yeah.
Next up, I have blocking. And an example I have is like Great Western Trail, littering the
oh, dear Lord, yes.
Littering
so many buildings and
with buildings,
hazards, right? And just everything just takes so much longer as a consequence. Yeah,
exactly. Slowing down how fast people can move through, sort of action spots, filling up the action spots, slowing down the game. So, controlling the tempo that way.
Let me ask you a question. This is kind of a digression. Do you generally find yourself in a position... what do you find yourself saying more often to yourself? I need to slow the game down, or I need to accelerate to the end game?
Usually accelerate.
Yeah, me too. I think it's much easier when you think you're winning, or when you're losing, but nothing is going to get better, to be like, okay, I need to accelerate the end game trigger. Then to have the presence of mind to be like, okay, I'm not doing too well, but I can slow things down and give myself time to catch up. That's a harder thing for me personally. I don't know if it's true for everyone.
And then I have some other examples of end game triggers here. So like Whale Riders has an interesting one where you sort of move all the way down to the bottom of the board and then work your way up, and whoever gets to the end. But there's also other incentives to move. Not only, ending the game faster or because you think you're winning, it's getting to those markets that are more lucrative for you, or giving you a chance to hit those markets longer than other players. So that's an interesting way to do it.
Right, but sometimes, and again, this is one of the genius of well writers. We need to play that again soon. If everyone else rockets ahead and you stay behind and you go slowly, it is often the case that the markets left behind will be very lucrative to exploit. And so, yeah, it's exactly right. The tempo of a game of well writers can vary considerably from table to table and player to player based on how things shake out. There's an advantage to being the first mover, but sometimes there's an advantage to being the last mover, and I've been in both circumstances in that game.
And then there's one-time goals, and this happens a lot in war games where there's those objectives that you need to take. As soon as you take those objectives, the game is over. So building up around those, making people, and that works a little bit more into what I've already said, chess-like, is like you force players to reinforce in some areas. Undaunted does this in a way where there's not only are there objectives that you have to take to win the game, but there's also ways to destroy the other units. So if you see your units getting destroyed, you can, it changes what you're going to do. You're not going to throw your units into trouble as much.
Do you use, like, for example, the best example for that in the case of Undaunted is your commander. It's called different things in different games, but broadly speaking, in the Undaunted series games, when you play your commander, you can either buy a whole bunch of cards and reinforce, or typically you can then draw 2 more cards and have a super turn. And that really accelerates things, which sometimes you need to do. You need to get to that tile before someone else. Your units are vulnerable. They need to get out of dodge. But then you also have this incredible pressure to slow things down because you need more cards into your deck because that's how you absorb casualties. And that's one of the ways in which I find the card play at Undaunted so tense. That's how you're being pulled in different directions. But yeah, there's considerable tempo considerations as well.
And there's Scythe does it in an interesting way too. There's all these different ways to get these objective stars, and whoever gets to 6 first will end the game. So you can watch somebody slowly, work their way up, and if you think they're going to end sooner, then it's going to completely change how other people play.
Yeah, and how you often beat me in Scythe is because I'm doing my traditional Mark thing of having blinders on and being like, I want to go as fast as possible and just racking up stars. And you're like, fine. And you end the game with like 1 or 2 stars, but you control half the map. You get 1 billion points from your held territory. It's like, but I have more stars. And you're like, I don't care.
And this is a minor one, and I don't think I've ever seen it employed, but sometimes I've used it. It's like sort of like the end of the round cleanup, where you're going to lose, where there are things to draft or options, right? There's all these cards that people get to buy, but at the end of the round, you're going to clear the last 2 of every row or something, and you can see cards that are going to help other players, and so you can buy cards that you don't really care about that are cheap, but are just going to move those, worthy cards for other players into the area that they're going to be discarded, and that'll either force them to buy them early, maybe for resources that are cost them dearly, or not be able to buy them at all, and therefore they'll just get wiped.
There are also games where at the start of the game or near the start of the game, you effectively determine how long the game is going to be, but you sometimes do this in secret. So the best example of this is Food Chain Magnate, where you decide how big the bank is going to be, but you do so in secret. And so that can help inform whether you want to play a quick game where discounts are going to rule the day, or a longer game where you really want to get that luxuries manager to really pay off, and suddenly you're selling your pizza for $35.
True. I have Food Chain Magnate at the end as a game that just solidifies this in every way.
You're right.
Every part of Food Chain Magnate dictates the flow of the game.
You're right.
Whether it's like the milestones or the advertising or the money in the bank.
How fast you acquire cards, how fast you train cards, how fast you upgrade your management capability.
But we'll cycle back to that.
Are we no, we're going to cycle. Oh, because you're managing the tempo of this episode. That's why.
So.
Okay, great.
All right. Next up, I have sort of limited resources. Like there's some games like Orleans or a bunch of other games that have a finite number of resources.
Right.
And how quickly you scoop them up is going to change the flow of the game. Games like I just talked about Circus, the Mars game where there's the astronauts of the varying colors, and you can either take an action that uses these astronauts or your worker pawns. And usually people are quickly Ceres.
There is no circus in space.
Sorry. So people are quickly taking actions to scoop up those astronauts before they're gone because you need the certain colors. So that definitely dictates the flow of the game.
I don't know, man. It dictates the flow of the game, but you're not really manipulating the tempo. You're just scooping up the common resources as quickly as possible. The game, again, the turn is going to last as long as it's going to last.
True, but you're forcing other people's hands. Like if you have
that is true.
If you have 2 red action spots,
right,
and they also have
based on how you've built your engine and the supply of available astronauts, you are forcing people to engage in suboptimal tempo considerations. Yeah, you're right.
And Gaia Project sort of works the same way. There's the fancy green resource, and you can sort of have a pool of that on the side, which people can see, and so they know that you're going to take those limited actions. So you can either force them to take them early, or you can sort of manipulate the board that way.
It's true.
Dexterity games. This is a reach. Let's go with it.
It's true. In dexterity games, you often reach.
And a lot of dexterity games, I don't want to say it's the baby way. But it's sort of like the rule book way. Sort of
the rule book way?
I'm just saying, just
okay.
There is,
I'll stop talking because everything you say is crazy.
There is You're a Penguin. And what is the other one with the tower where you play the square cards and you have the Tetris pizza, the Crazy Tower? You're a Penguin and Crazy Tower. The rule book sort of dictates, you build straight up. It's like, yeah, we're going to build this thing. We never play that way.
No, Crazy Tower does not stipulate that you have to build straight up.
No, nor does You're a Penguin.
So why are you calling it the rulebook way? You looked pejoratively. Look, you took your jock position of haughtiness and said, well, you could play the baby rulebook way, as you looked directly at me and then made the 2-finger eyeball gesture.
Or you can play the way we usually play it, and we are putting the stands way off to the side, making it difficult for the next player.
By we, you mean you, yeah.
So we're manipulating the game, manipulating the flow or how the game is played by how we place the next pieces.
Yes, we are forced. You look at a dexterity game and say, why can't the end game be on turn 2?
Exactly. In my favor.
Yeah, it's true. And that kind of is similar to what we were talking about in terms of skull and poker and auction games. You take that risk, you go out and you stake a bold claim, and force other people to effectively bow out or try to follow on suboptimal terms. You're right. That is kind of a tempo consideration.
All right, I only have 2 more. I'll get over these. All right. Trick Takers. I really feel as though Trick Takers is also just a genre that sort of emphasizes what this flow is. You're sort of, the lead player can sort of designate how the game's going to go if people are, getting rid of cards.
Yeah, but not in a tempo way, though. I mean, trick-taking games, if anything, trick-taking games are like the opposite of a game where you can manipulate the tempo, because there's gonna be the same number of tricks regardless most of the time.
True, but once
there's only one exception, I think. That's Marshmallow Test. In Marshmallow Test, you're totally manipulating the tempo of the game. True. Because you need to make sure that the tricks fall and that people go out at the right timing.
But once people are void in certain, you can sort of dictate, what they're going to play.
Totally. Absolutely, you can force plays till the cows come home. But if chess had a fixed number of turns, then Zugzwang is now less about manipulating the tempo, or threatening pieces is less about tempo because it's a fixed number of turns. The reason why chess gets to be so dynamic in this way and engage in tempo manipulations is because how and when the end game evolves is variable from game to game. My intuition is, I'm willing to be. Yeah, but persuaded otherwise.
But the flow isn't always dictating how quickly the game's going to end. I think
sure, but trick-taking games as a rule are so formalistic. Everyone's going to end at the same time. Everyone's going to end in the same way. Again, there are some exceptions like Marshmallow Test, but by and large, they're so structured in such a way that you can manipulate how other people are going to play. Absolutely. You can force plays, force people to go out in a suit they don't want to go out on. You can force people to play a card they don't want to play, but that isn't really a tempo consideration or a flow consideration as far as I'm concerned.
And lastly, this should probably be a stretch as well, but you'll probably... Anyway, let's get on with it. Penalties. There are lots of games that allow players to, like Terraforming Mars. I'm going to do this. It gives me these few things, but it also lets me penalize other players. So it lets you,
take that elements can retard other people.
This person's winning, so I'm going to, take resources away from them. Azul is sort of the same thing as well. You're sort of taking groups of tiles and leaving a really bad pile for someone that's really going to bog their game down. So that, manipulates the flow slightly as well.
Do you have an example or two of some of your favorite instances of tempo or flow manipulation?
Yes. Like I said, I have 3 games. We've already talked about Food Chain Magnet.
Yeah.
And how it does almost everything. I feel as though Barrage is almost in the same vein as that.
Really?
Almost everything you do in Barrage, how you where the water is going to go, how you get into certain areas before other people, how you sort of manipulate the whole game.
Yeah, there's just so much scarcity that the timing of everything becomes so crucial, and consequently the building elements. On top of that, there's the tempo at which you yourself can build by virtue of the manipulation of the building wheel, right?
Yeah,
and cycling that becomes
and when you cycle that water through,
right,
as well,
and cycling water through, and when you commit to large number of worker spaces or drawing it out by placing one worker at a time. Yeah, it's a good point.
And the third one I have is Hansa Teutonica.
Absolutely.
Once again, it's a game that is just based around constant pressure and the flow of the game. It's like putting workers out in order just to get them pushed out.
Yes.
Or
which itself is a delay tactic, right?
Yes.
Someone else just might be sprinting. It's like, I've got the actions and the cubes. I just want to put out offices as fast as possible. And someone else saying, I think I'm just going to get in your way for a while and see what shakes out.
Exactly. Filling up spaces, bogging stuff up. I also threw a game in that sort of proposes that it can do this, but really fell short. Kuchahora. We already talked about that.
Yeah.
It gives you this feel as though you can manipulate the market and change the whole flow of the game,
yeah.
but it's so random and inconsequential.
I wouldn't say random. I would say true. Inconsequential.
True.
I mean, like,
it is not random.
Plus or minus $1, is that really going to change what you're going to be doing with yourself? And so, I mean, sometimes the inputs and outputs are a little counterintuitive, and that may contribute to a sense of arbitrariness, but I wouldn't necessarily say random. But yeah. I hear you. So I'm just going to give two examples. One, a comparatively older game from the 20th century, and one, a comparatively more recent game. The older one I'm going to talk about is Raw, because what sun tiles you have, I talk about this all the time in the context of Raw, determines how fast you want the round to go, and how frequently you want the auctions to happen. Because auctions in Raw occur, sometimes they occur randomly, but sometimes they occur under your control. And you need to look and see what your buying capability is. If your buying capability is high, you want to slow the game down. You want the lots to be big. You want high-value things to get sold so you can get value for your money. If you only have garbage, you need things to go quick. You need them to be lots of tiny little auctions, because that's the only way you're ever going to be able to spend anything. And watching people navigate that, and the best position, of course, is when you have a good variety of sun tiles and you don't care and you're perfectly happy to be reactive. Is one of those lots a good one that you want to snag for one of your tiles? No? Okay, let someone else make the decision. The more recent one I'd give, and this is kind of like some of the dynamics we talked about in the context of Galactic Renaissance, is Imperium. Imperium Classics, Imperium Legends, Imperium Horizons. Because you get to upgrade your deck from your own group of Civilization unique cards every time you cycle through your deck. Now, most civs like doing this and would like to do this as often as possible. But there's always this trade-off, because the cards you have in your hand are often really good. And so there's this tension between holding on to cards to build combos and just cycling through your deck as quickly as possible so as to get to those other cards. But what I really like, and this is less about tempo manipulation and more about the design genius of Imperium, some civs penalize you every time you go through your deck. So, like, the Arthurians are a little complicated. Sometimes they want to go through, sometimes they don't. Some of their civs generally just want to delay. Some civs have reasonably crappy cards getting added to their deck at first and then better ones later. Anyway, there's a lot of different civs that do it differently, but fundamentally the sort of easy, straightforward civs, your Romans, your Greeks, your Persians, your Sassanids, they just want to burn through the deck as quickly as possible, but at the tension of the quality of card play that you might be going through. And I love those dynamics and that trade-off. Everything Nigel Buckle and David Zertze have done together has been great. I can't wait to see more from them. So that's going to do it for this week. Thank you very, very much for joining us for So Very Wrong About Games. We appreciate very much your deciding to spend time with us. Please do take care, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye. Peace! You've been listening to So Very Wrong About Games, a board gaming podcast about board games produced by Michael Walker and edited by Marc. You can find all our information at SoWrongGames.com. Special thanks to What Does It Eat for allowing us to use their most excellent song, FOS, as our intro. You can find them at WhatDoesItEat.com. We hope to see you again soon, and as always, try to be right, but remember, you're so very wrong.